Wow Chungus, looks like you're doing a great job at dealing with the bad guys.
If you're looking for something unique and a little bit weird, then Hypnospace Outlaw is very, very those things. This is a game that is from the brain behind Dropsy the Clown, so that should give you some idea of the weirdness that you're in for, and it puts you in the role of an enforcer. Someone whose job it is to patrol the internet and look for violating content. The internet in this case is the titular Hypnospace, which is sort of a weird headset-based thing that people wear and go to sleep with, or something weird like that. It's all very strange, and the game delves into some of the ethics and potential side effects of that sort of technology. But your main job is to scour the websites, and there are many of them, looking for things that contravene the rules. You could look for copyrighted content, which right now, especially with the Article 13 stuff going on in Europe, is very, very pertinent. You can look for viruses, malicious content, harassment. You use a rather simple, it looks more complex than it is. You use a rather straightforward UI to, basically you click the gavel that's on the screen, and that brings a drop down of potential violations, and you can pick the violation that you think works, click the part of the web page that you feel violates said rules, and then if you're right, you'll get some coins, some hypnocurrency basically, which you can use to spend on stickers, wallpapers, virtual pets like this angelic hamster here, and you can dick around. You get clues as to what you're looking for, but you get emailed cases from those running Hypnospace, and they give you an idea of what you're looking for. But there's a lot of detective work involved. You can search for certain terms and words. You scour each website looking for clues, things that people have said, links that may point somewhere, and you can uncover different pieces of software, all sorts of little communities. There are many stories that are told through the websites themselves. Different characters, different people that host their own sites talk about their lives and the different trials and tribulations they go through. There is a lot to play around with in terms of finding virtual pets, finding mini games. There is a ton buried in here, and it's all given this extra weight by the fact that it takes on the appearance of a living, breathing online space, which they can get away with the timing, so it doesn't have to be super complicated. Everything can be quite simple, quite easy to portray, but there's a ton. I mean, you can, if you want, ignore the cases and whatnot and focus mostly on just browsing the internet, the Hypnospace, and getting into all the weird shenanigans and downloading the strange music. For some reason, unfortunately, my capturing of the footage didn't get any of the music. It only gets the voice files of the little robot helper, sort of the Clippy equivalent that talks to you and notifies you of things. So I've just added bits from the soundtrack underneath. It's worth listening to the game's soundtrack for the weird corporate jingles and the strange, like, this evokes the age of Winamp, Real Player, that sort of thing, and it has its own version of that, which can play all sorts of weird music, like the Granny Cream song. It's great. It puts you in the mind of Her Story, if any of you have played Her Story, in that it takes place on a computer desktop, and you're essentially role-playing the user of said desktop, and the story unfolds with the stuff that you find pre-existent on the computer, more or less. And it works in that same way, in that you have a degree of separation from the story, from what's going on, and yet you can find it very effective, very absorbing if you allow yourself to slip into that role, if you get into the mindset of, I am an enforcer. Physically, that's who I am, sat at my own computer with this fake OS that you can roleplay as real. And there's the amount of work that's gone into populating the hypnospace with all sorts of things and all sorts of equivalents to real life things. There's these creatures called the squishers, which are a sort of Pokemon equivalent, and there's talk on the hypnospace about religious folks who think that squishers are the devil, which reflects, you know, that time period. I remember in the UK in, I think it was 98, 99, around that time period, where Pokemon had hit big in Europe, and like in America and plenty of other countries, there were religious types more or less exploiting the popularity of Pokemon to get attention for themselves, just like they did, you know, a decade or so later with Harry Potter, whenever the films came out for that. You know, anything that's popular and kids like and threaten, you know, kids threatening to like it more than God, they'll jump on that and say it's the devil. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point of all that is that there is not just a lot of modern reflections, a lot of stuff that this game says about the internet now, especially when it comes to big platforms and their ineffectiveness at moderating content. There's a great website you can find on the I call it a website, they're not websites, but there's a page on the Hypnospace you can find where someone is talking about harassment they've received, but they've received the harassment on a chat program that enforcers can't access, because as an enforcer, you can only receive information and report on violations. You can't get into a chat room or anything like that, which mechanically works so that the game doesn't have to come up with a whole AI that can have fake chats with you. So it works from saving time and effort and resources, but it also has this great story element to it, where you can see certain violations, you can see harassment, but you as an enforcer have no real power. In fact, something like copyright infringement is a lot easier to deal with. You can take down a picture of a cartoon fish a lot easier than you can deal with someone who's being quite legitimately stalked online. So there's a lot of cool stuff that's in this game. A lot of themes that are relevant to today, but then also a lot of themes that were relevant back then. So there's a lot of nostalgic humour about the kinds of dramas that people get involved with, the weird fan sites that have badly animated, low-quality images, often just rotating symbols. And like I said, stuff like the squishers, crazes and fads of the 90s. And of course, a whole Y2K thing gets brought up as well. That should be quite obvious. There's a lot of talk about that. The hysteria about Y2K is brought up in this game. It's a central theme. There's just a ton of effort and love that's been put into this thing. And the fact that it looks like a nightmarish hellscape would be a criticism in any other game, almost any other game. But here, the fact that the visuals burn your eyes is something of a compliment. Something of a compliment. I must admit that sometimes, especially when you deal with viruses and glitches, sometimes the visuals can be a bit too much. A bit too distracting, but for the most part, the authenticity of it is what sells it. It looks like old crap internet, which is exactly what it's supposed to look like. It sounds like old crap internet. The music is great. The animations, the low quality, whenever they do have live action footage, it really isn't that awfully compressed, covered in artifacts. Inferior quality video footage. Hypnospace Outlaw really knows its stuff when it comes to replicating that feel of the Geocities era. And it harks back to, if I may put on my rose-coloured specs, it harks back to a simpler time. This was a time before Twitter, before Facebook, before the internet became a destructive, ghastly shithole. Or at the very least, it harks back to a simpler time before we all learned that's really what the internet was deep down. But once you get enough human beings together, the lesson to be learned is that the worst thing the human race can do is get closer together because we all find out we hate each other. But enough of such self-satisfied nihilism, back to the game. I've got a few criticisms in terms of puzzle design. Sometimes it feels just a little bit too much vague. Just a little bit too much vague. A little too vague, that's what I meant to say, a little too much vague. I'm going to keep that in, fuck it. Sometimes the puzzles feel a little vague. The case files you're given give you starting clues, and then if you look through the various pages, you'll find more clues. Things that people have said, little pictures that crop up, but sometimes it doesn't feel like you've got quite enough, which isn't helped by the fact that some of the puzzles are a case of get the thing to get the thing, to get the thing to get the thing. And your brain can sometimes collapse as you try and work out which stage of the puzzle you're at, which things you need to accomplish which things. But for the most part, it's just an interesting, intriguing detective game that has quite a few things to say under the surface, that talks a lot about our interactions between each other, how we conduct ourselves online, and the struggles of online content moderation, and the enforcement of potential rules. There's a lot more to unpack with Hypnospace Outlaw, but I feel if I unpack any more, I'll be firmly in spoiler territory, and I don't want to go there. So suffice to say, if the game looks appealing to you, and you've got nostalgia for them old days of the internet, then check it out. Certainly if you've played Her Story and liked that. This has a very similar conceit, but it goes in some wildly different directions. And that's Hypnospace Outlaw. Apologies again for my voice being as it is. As you may be able to tell, it's getting somewhat better. It is recovering. I'm still a bit wheezy, so you might be hearing that in the video as well, but we're getting over the bronchitis. Now I've got to work out how to talk about Sekiro, despite the fact that I really don't want to play more Sekiro. Not that it's a bad game, it's just certainly not my game. Hypnospace Outlaw, that is more my game. So yeah, that's why I'm doing a video on it now. You should play it if you want. You might like it. I did.